Happy Flow Day, everyone. We're so excited that you are here hanging out with us today. Huge shout out to my co-host who is hanging out in the future this week in Japan. Happy birthday, Mr. Doc Rock. We wish you were here, but we're excited that you're not because you deserve a break. So if you were here hanging out with us in the live chat, hello, you are more than welcome to drop your comments and questions live in this live chat space so that we can pull them into the conversation. We have an exciting conversation here today. We're going to be talking all about podcasting in 2023. We're going to talk through some really fun stories and examples and hopefully guidance from the incredible Dave Jackson. So you're in for a treat today. But if you are listening to this later, watching this later, you can always reach us by email, flow@ecamm.com, or you can leave questions in the video replay if you're here on YouTube. And you can always join our live studio audience. We hang out here every single Tuesday from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern. So always welcome to hang out in the live studio audience with us. It's probably like one of my favorite parts of the week is just getting to hang out in the live studio audience and getting to hang out with our live studio audience. So thank you to everyone who is hanging out. As always, thank you to the incredible Mr. Paul Duncan for keeping it real and organized and moderating everything. Yeah, you have to have a queue. Otherwise, it's not a question, a Q colon. Otherwise, I might miss it. Luis might miss it. We don't want to miss your question. So make sure that you do that. Well, without further ado, we are so excited. I am so excited that we somehow tricked Dave Jackson into joining us today. He is from the School of Podcasting. He has been podcasting for what feels like forever. So he is the mind behind all of this. So I'm going to ask him all the questions you ask me. I'm going to ask him all the questions I have myself and everything that you throw into the chat. But we are going to have a lot of fun here today. And give him a shout out, people in the chat, because he is brand new to Ecamm. Welcome to the show and welcome to the Ecamm fam, Dave.
Glad to be here. Yes, so many windows, so many options. I'm that new Ecamm person. Yes, it's like, but enjoying it, and I can actually make it look like I have a flesh tone, which is good. I love that feature in Ecamm. So glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's okay. That's the fun of it. Like I feel like the joy of Ecamm is that it's hopefully for everyone easy enough that you can just push go and get going and record and live stream, but complicated enough that you can do all kinds of crazy things. I was on my personal podcast, I think it was last week or the week before, and I think it was Paul. Someone reminded me that like I could have like now spinning overlays that kind of spin in and out. And I was like, oh man, I could have some fun with that. So there's always a new feature, always something new coming to make it even more exciting or silly, depending on what your background is.
That's what I love about it is, you click on something and then you adjust it, and I would say almost all the time. I was going to say 9 times out of 10. I'm like, no, I think it's all the time. It's like, oh, that's what that does. And then you decide if you need it or not, or if you need spinning, swooping, whatever you're doing, and off you go. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Not unlike podcasting, which is what we're here to chat about today. So before we jump in, you have like an incredible background in history and podcasting. I'm loving that you're rocking your Libsyn shirt because we're like Team Libsyn all the way over here. Why don't you give us a little bit of a blurb about you and how you got into this in the first place? 2005, right? That's what I read.
2005.
Correctly?
Yeah. At the time, my background's in teaching. So I was teaching a lot of Microsoft Office and QuickBooks and time management and customer service in the corporate world.
Yeah.
And but this again, everything I say just makes me sound old because, well, gray hair. But I was building websites in Microsoft Front Page,
I
and
remember Front Page. Yeah.
and I made one for musicians because that's another hobby of mine. And so a friend of mine came back from some big marketing conference and he said, "Hey, you know how you missed the MySpace boat?" Yeah. And I said, yeah, don't rub it in. He goes, the next big thing is going to be podcasting. And I Googled it. I said, how do you spell that again? And there was 1.5 pages of results. That was it. Yeah.
Wow.
And so
Wow. A really
when I
different landscape than today.
yeah. And the whole front page wasn't just all ads. That was the other thing. It was completely different back then. But I remember when I pieces parted one together, I uploaded my file and saw it come back down on my computer and I went, Oh, I get what this does now. And so shortly thereafter, so I took my blog and turned it into a podcast. And I had somebody say, wow, this is really cool. You went from being words on a page to a person. And then I got a voicemail from a guy. Now I'm in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. I'm in Mogadore, Ohio at the time, me and the cows. And I get a voicemail from Michael Van Laar from Nuremberg, Germany. And I went, oh,
Whoa.
wait, whoa, hold on. Really? Yeah. So that's when I grabbed my flag and I'm like, I hereby claim podcasting in the name of Dave. And, all the, and also at the time, I was next to a water heater in the basement with a flush pipe behind me, so just praying that A, no one would start the dryer or the washer, nobody would flush the toilet, and in the winter, yeah, okay, because I was in the room with the furnace, and I was like, "Please don't get cold." So it was a lot of fun. The early years were pretty painful because this is in the days of iPods. So I'd say like, "Do you guys listen to podcasts?" And they'd go, do you need an iPod for that? I'm like, nope, just the internet and speakers. So it was fun.
Yeah, I mean, even now, trying to explain it to some people, they're like, it's now, it's become so popular that I feel like, it's almost the reverse where it's like you don't have a podcast. Like
Yeah.
that is the world that people live in. Yeah, no one had any idea what a podcast was. You had to be like, oh, it's kind of like the radio, but like on your
Yeah, that's
computer.
it. Yeah.
And and I put it out myself. I think there's like an important lesson there we've been talking about a lot, and I really wanted to drive home. And I'm hoping for your thoughts and feelings and guidance on this space. But I feel like now, as you said, it was really complicated back then, right? It wasn't something
Yeah.
that you could easily do. Whereas it's really easy now. But you just needed to start, right? You were there and you were like, okay, well, I don't have the best possible space. I'm in this space where anything could go wrong. The sound could be horrible, but you still did it. I feel like now we have like access to all of these different things. We have, access to, by and large, a lot of free things, a lot of things that are really affordable, really accessible, but people are still kind of afraid to take that first step. And I feel like that's one of the things that kind of has stayed the same all the way through in the world of podcasting is that you have to start and then you have to get a little bit better every single time. And you're not going to start perfect. No one starts perfect, right?
Yeah,
There's no,
start ugly, and, we all when you listen to your first episode, you're like, "Ugh," mine is just I every other word is, and I'm like, "Oh, that's horrible," but you leave it out there because you wanna show people, "This is where I started, look, this is how bad I was." And, yeah, what's the old, Zig Ziglar line? "You don't have to be great to start, but you do have to start to be great," and that really is
there you
true.
go. Yeah.
So yeah, and I know they were bought by Spotify, but Anchor came on board and they were free,
Yep.
and everybody started a podcast. And I was like, that wasn't the barrier to a good podcast, wasn't the $5 you spend on hosting, because we had a ton of really, really bad shows. My favorite was somebody had taken their phone and put it on speaker, and then as they were eating their pizza in the mall, discussed what they should talk about on the podcast, and they actually put that out, and I was like, "That's the person that comes to me and goes, 'Yeah, I'm having a hard time growing my podcast.'" And I'm like, "Well, number 1, maybe not record on your phone on speaker in a mall while you're eating pizza." That would be my first suggestion. So, but, yeah, it's so easy now. I always kinda joke and say I could burp into my phone and have it on Apple probably by the end of the show.
You
It's
could.
really super easy. Yeah. It's
You're
just
really
but that's not what people are listening for. That's not really, or the tech. The tech I have, it's not on my desk, but I have a little, Zoom PodTrack P4 that same kind of unit 5 years ago was $1,000, and now that's 200 bucks. So everything's become easier, it's become more affordable,
Yep.
but going back to your original point, the problem is up here.
Mhm.
There's a thing on Netflix where Garth Brooks has just got some sort of award from because he's in New York City. He's gonna play that big park that they have, Central Park, and he's
Yeah.
convinced that nobody's gonna want to listen to a cowboy in the middle of New York City. And he's literally like closed all the curtains and this and that. And finally his wife goes down and says, Garth, they had to move the barricades back. He's like, because there's nobody here. And they're like, no, in fact, his manager came in and said, "There's 980,000 people out there." And he's like, "Wait, you're telling me there's 980,000 people out there?" He goes, "No, I'm telling you there were 980,000 people out there 20 minutes ago." And so, Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep, we all suffer. Those are all famous people who have serious imposter syndrome. Like Tom Hanks is convinced he's just fooled everyone.
So this is like really, again, like say it louder for the people in the back of the live chat. But I see this comment coming in from Overgrown Apartment 13. Fantastic name. Saying if only those words were enough to make us stop worrying about our
Uh,
mistakes and help start going.
here,
It's true, but we need to keep telling ourselves this and telling each other this, that there is someone out there for the awesome idea that you have, unless it's talking about creating a podcast on speakerphone in the mall. Don't do that.
right. Yeah,
Don't do
don't do that.
crazy things.
But here's when you press record, because you've got this worry about nobody's going to listen to me, which then is replaced by holy cow, people are listening to me. But you have this whole who's going to listen to me? I'm going to sound stupid, things like that.
Yeah.
When your desire to serve that one person who needs to hear your show is more than your fear of looking stupid, that's when you press record. So
There's the equation.
don't
Yep.
focus on you and how you feel. Focus on how you're gonna help the person you're trying to reach. Because every
Mhm.
good podcast at its core typically is serving an audience of some sort or another. So that's the thing you gotta focus on. Focus on your audience and what they need, not so much, I'm gonna look stupid, and what if nobody listens? Because people are gonna listen. If nothing
Yeah.
else, if you get your cousins involved, you might get up to, 24 downloads, something like that. So
I so I do this podcast, and then I have a personal podcast that's just for fun, and like just for everyone that is in this chat that's like, oh, no one will listen, there's no one wants to hear things. I do it literally for fun, that like have no plans to monetize or to take over the world. And it was not that hard to get to 20 episodes real quick. It was not that hard to get to, I think we're at like something, I don't know, like 65 or something like that YouTube subscribers, and we're up to over 100 downloads, right? Like those numbers seem small, but they went like that. It was so fast to get there, and it was that moment of like, oh, no one's watching and listening, to, oh, it's, now we have like a pretty regular crew that joins us, and we live stream it, and then we feed it out to all the different podcast players. But it is amazing that like it was easy enough that it was an idea, and then it was all the a year probably of just being like, oh, I don't know, should we really do this, what does it look like, and kind of talking ourselves out of it, to just pushing the button and going. And then it wasn't that hard to get to get like those first few episodes out, and to build an audience. Like it really, there is an audience for you if you've thought through a concept, and you really have thought through like who those potential people could be on the other side, and creating content for them with them in mind.
well, and you said the magic word, which is fun. Like, start a podcast for fun, because
Yeah.
what happens is when you first start out, if the goal is I wanna make money quickly, the key word there is quickly, that's the problem. That's gonna be the soul-crushing reality that stops your show, because you monetize an audience. You don't have one yet, you just started. Whereas the person that starts out for fun, and think about this, if my goal, if my why, I'm starting a podcast because I want to talk about Batman in the basement. That's the name of my show. I'm just making it up. The minute I get episode 1 out, that show is hugely successful. Why? Because I'm having fun with my friends in the basement, and that was the goal. And then because you're having fun, you keep doing it. And then what do you know? All of a sudden you look up, like you said, hey, there are people listening to that. And then once you finally get an audience, if you want to, because you don't have to, then you can start thinking about monetizing it. But if you start out first, that's why so many podcasters never make it past episode 7, because they're watching every minute that they spend on this. They're like, it took me 10 hours to do a 15-minute podcast, and I didn't make a dime. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
don't try to make money quickly with a podcast. I tried that when I first started. I started my podcast. I went back to school to get my teaching degree, and
Hmm.
I started my membership site, and people are like, "What's a podcast?" And I'm trying to make money on that. So that's when I talk about you can't make money quickly. I know that from firsthand. That's why I was doing guitar lessons and playing in a band and building websites for people. So, start off for fun, have an idea. If you want to do it as a business, definitely have your calls to action in place and things like that. But a lot of the people I talk to that are actually making some income with their podcast started off, they were just doing it for fun.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's huge to keep, to keep in mind. And I mean, honestly, like I think having I think having that for me makes this podcast better as well, because it's again, like it's fun, and the consistency of doing it builds my confidence, and the more confident I am, the better the show is, and the better this show is, and the more that I feel like I understand, the bigger picture of the podcasting space and what changes I want to make. And so if you're sitting here and you're like, oh, I really need to start this podcast for work, or for my business, or you really do want to get to a point where you are monetizing, then start one for fun. Don't like start one that you aren't going to monetize. Start it for fun and use that as the opportunity to understand the space better, and just keep reminding yourself if something goes wrong, oh, that it's fine, that's just for fun. Like I'm just doing that for fun. It's like it's a practice space, because it does take time to build that confidence up and to get better at it. And it's going to take time to figure out what the best gear is for you, or what where the best tools are, and what you want to accomplish. So I think practicing it, whether or not you release it, or whatever you do with that content, I think having a practice kind of fun space is a good thing to do, regardless of what your plans are down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think about it, authors have rough drafts. I wrote
Hmm.
a book a couple years ago, and I was amazed at how many times we edited that thing. I'm like, really? There's more typos? And it was like, finally, I
Oh,
think it was like the eighth time they're like, yes, we're ready to publish this now. So authors have rough drafts. Actors have dress rehearsals. Athletes
yep.
have preseason. So that first episode that took you so long to record, I'm probably going to guess you're going to want to delete that, because that really is your rough draft. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I see so many people miss, and I get it, because you just spent 12 hours on this MP3 file or with a video, whatever you're
Yeah.
doing, and the last thing you want to do is send it to somebody and have them go, "Oh, this was good, that was good, but boy, that part there, that was bad." But on the other hand, if the goal is to resonate with your audience, Ron Howard, the famous director, actor, has won a gazillion different Emmys and Oscars and all that. He sits in with an audience. He does like a preview, because he knows when they're supposed to laugh and when they're supposed to cry, etc. And if they're not, if they're crying when they're supposed to be laughing and vice versa,
Yeah.
it's time to go back to the editing thing. And so that's kind of where some people get upset if you use the word hobby around a podcast, but the hobbyist doesn't really care, because I have one of those shows. I have a show.
Yeah.
It's just me spewing my opinion, and I put it out in the world. It's the best $7 therapy you can get. So there's definitely that. But there are those people that are like, hey, I want this to be part of my brand, you know, uh, use it as a marketing arm of my business or whatever you're doing. So there are kind of two schools of thought. And by having realistic expectations, you're much less likely to burn out.
Yeah, definitely. I see this great question coming in from Jeff C, which I am excited to cover with you and get your thoughts on. So, here in 2023, do all podcasts have to be on YouTube? Like, where, you've kind of been there from almost the start of all of this, and so you've watched kind of it go from an audio space into now, video is such a huge player. What are your thoughts on video and YouTube in the podcasting space?
Well, this is what a lot of people don't know. Back in 2004 and 5 and 6, some of the biggest podcasts were video. Ask a Ninja, Tiki Bar. If you could just Google Ask a Ninja, it's a phenomenal show. And then this thing came along called Twitter. And Twitter, before it was Twitter, was this thing called Odeo, which was this podcast directory. And then this company you may have heard of called Apple came into the space.
No, I haven't heard of them.
Yeah, and all these small companies, Yahoo, a bunch of them had podcast stuff, and when Apple came in, they were all like, "Ah, Apple's here. Never mind. Everybody go home. We're done." And so Odeo had this whole following thing, and they turned into Twitter, and that took some of the spotlight off of podcasting, and it kinda slowed the growth. So it was
Mhm.
huge back in the day, but yeah, so the key word there is, do I have to be on YouTube? Well, no, you don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
If you're a YouTuber, you don't have to strip out the audio and put it out as an audio podcast, and vice versa. I always say, first of all, we're all looking at the new Sony blah blah blah, $1,500 DSLR camera. We have one of those. It's called your phone, so you can use that if you want. I
Yeah.
had somebody this week. I said, "Man, your video looks great. What are you using?" He goes, "iPhone 14." I go, "Oh
Right?
yeah."
Yeah.
So So you've got that, and the beauty of doing video first, if you've got the budget, is the fact that I can take the audio out and kind of go, if we call audio left and video right, I can go left if I start with video. If I start left with just audio, yes, we can make everybody put up parentheses, videos with that, with the little static image or the little squiggly line, but that's not
Yeah.
that's not a real video. You can't go the other way around. So that's one of the reasons why I started doing more video is because, well, even if I don't use the video, I want to have that option of making shorts or something out of it where I
Yeah.
can't do that if it's just audio. So, do I have to be on YouTube? You don't have to. Do I think it's a great idea? Well, as everyone says, it's the number 2 search engine. And yeah, if you can, yes, by all means. Because the other thing is it's free.
It's free,
So
and it's
yeah,
really, like, low lift. Like, we thought for a while we were gonna do an entire episode on, how to open up a YouTube channel and start a YouTube podcast. It
yeah,
takes seconds to do, like, it's not even worth an entire episode
yeah.
because it's that easy. Like, when I say that, like, any idiot can do it, like, this idiot could do it in, like, literally under 5 minutes. I was like, "Well, now I have a YouTube channel." So, yeah,
Well,
even if you're never gonna use that video down the road, it is, I think, worth recording it anyway. And like you said, we have the gear to do it. Like, it may not feel like you do because you wanna go, down the road into the more expensive cameras and microphones, but you do. You have a phone, you have the ability to at least get started in video, and I think it does make a big difference.
and flip that around. If you're a YouTuber, why aren't you putting your content out unless it's like the woodworking show or a cooking show? But if it's just a talking head show,
Yeah.
strip out that audio because I can't watch your video in the car. I can't watch your video while I'm grocery shopping, but I
Mhm.
can listen to it. And if it's something I can listen to, by all means, put that out as an audio podcast because there's more opportunities to listen. You're not going to have that maybe as much engagement because they can tell if you're making a funny face or whatever, things that are visual, but put it out as an audio because, some people like audio, some people like video.
Yeah, and I mean, I live in a world where I go back and forth between both of them all day long. Like, I,
Yeah.
I jump in my car, the podcast I was listening to it continues to play. I get out of my car, I'm back at work, it's playing in the background, and then I'm switching over, I'm watching a video version of something, and then it's like I'm constantly switching back and forth. And platforms like YouTube are making that increasingly easier. Like, I get into my car now, and it plays the video in the background, but it's minimized. My phone is just sitting in my car and I'm driving and listening to the whole thing. So yeah, I think you are missing something if you're not at least thinking about it. It is probably, more daunting to think about if you have been in the audio space for so long and are trying to think through, okay, now how am I going to get into video? That is slightly harder, but even then, just start fresh and start new and go forward.
And you can buy like I think it was $40 a lapel mic that didn't sound horrible. I was surprised. Plug that into your phone, go sit by a window. Sunshine is free, so there's your lighting and go to
Mhm.
town. So it doesn't have to be, I started off with a old beat up microphone that I plugged directly into my Dell computer's sound card. Which is not something I would recommend now. But like we said earlier, you start ugly and then you update this and update that. And when people see what I have now, because I've got 2 key lights and lights in the back and blah blah blah, and it's like, and I see other people's stuff and I'm like, oh, we all have that background envy, but I'm like, I didn't start here. I started in many different apartments and rooms, and just kind of upgrade here and there as your budget sees fit.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So School of Podcasting, what are some of the most popular questions or common questions that you're getting from people that are jumping into this podcasting space?
Yeah, some of them. Well, the first one is always, "What's the best microphone under $100?" So that's the Samson Q2U in my book. So
Mhm.
we get there, and then it's a matter of, in some cases, you have the person that can't decide what topic to talk about because you have one
Mm.
person that's like, "I'm not sure." I don't get many of those because if you don't know what you're going to talk about, that's
Why are
you're
you
not
here?
really
Yeah.
ready yet.
Yep.
Yeah. But I'll have the occasional person that will have, "Well, I love this. I love this. Can I do them all?" And I'm like, "Well, do you know somebody who's into death metal and knitting? I'm not sure that's gonna be a crossover audience, that way." So, but, you have to go back to why am I doing this? And that could be, I wanna be seen as an expert. I want to reach a global audience. I want to use it as a marketing arm of my business. Networking is really something where, if you I had somebody that said they started podcasting because they couldn't get past the gatekeeper, and they were trying to get to all these CEOs, and they said the
Mm,
funniest thing was the CEO called this person because they heard their podcast on a treadmill. He's like, "I got right past the gatekeeper."
yep.
So, and if I go to someone and say, "Hey, can I pick your brain for 20 minutes?" They're like, "Get out of here, kid, you bother me." But if I say, "Will you come on my podcast and share your vast knowledge with my awaiting audience?" They'll be like, "Oh, where do I sign up?" So,
It's so true. That is so true. I'm totally guilty of that. I've said yes to podcasts. I probably would never have been on a call with these people, but I was
right,
like, "Oh, yeah, sure. I'll be a podcast guest. That sounds
yeah.
fun." Yeah.
So, it kinda depends on your why,
Yeah.
because I had somebody that wanted to monetize, and I forget what their other show was, but I do remember that one of the ones was they wanted to do something for college students with a goal of monetization, and I said, "I don't know when the last time you were in college," I go, "but I'm pretty sure the stereotypical college student has no money." I said, "'Cause they spent, $130 on their books and, all this other stuff." I said, "So, knowing your why can kind of help you pick in some cases what to do." And then the other one is just like their format, because there is no kind of one size fits all.
Very true.
Mine, I write a blog post. I used to have like 4 bullet points, and then I would just riff on those. And then as I was listening back, I would type up a blog post because I want Google to find this too. And
Mhm.
inevitably, I would be typing this up and I'd go, "Oh, you know what I should have said there?" And that's when I was like, "Hey, Dave, you're a little ADHD. Let's write up the blog post first and really
Oh,
figure out
interesting.
what am I
Yep.
trying to say." And then I boil that down to my bullet points. I could read the blog post, but then it sounds like I'm reading the podcast to you, and I'm not that good to make it sound like I'm not reading. So I still do the bullet points, but I've thought out what am I really trying to say, what I want people to do, how do I want
Mhm.
them to feel or whatever, and go from that. And so some people will just I just wanna hit record and talk. And that's a whole other skill, because the other one is, how do I talk to nobody? There's nobody in the room with me, I feel stupid. And that's where you have to, again, kind of figure out who your audience is, or at least one kind of avatar. So
Mhm.
I talked to Ken Blanchard a lot, I talked to Kim Craggy. These are all people I've met, and I know they listen to my show, and I'll ask myself, does this have anything in it for Kim, or is that gonna work for Ken or whoever? So, and
Yeah.
I just picture my invisible friend across the table, and I just hit record, and I still talk with my hands, and occasionally will bump my mic and like, "Okay, let's calm down, Dave," you know? And then it's just a matter of little baby steps. Like somebody said, "Okay, I've got a name," 'cause a good name is when you say to somebody, "I'm doing a podcast called How to Lose Weight Over 50. What do you think it's about?" And they go, "Duh." But if you say, you know, "Hey, I'm doing a podcast called Dunlap disease." And you're like, "What is that about?" And you're like, "Get it? My belly Dunlapped over my belt." I'm like, "Yeah, don't get cute with the name. Make it
Don't get
really,
cute, I know.
you know."
It's so hard for some of us. I come from a copywriting background, so I'm always like, "What's the cutest name? It needs to have alliteration. It's
Yeah,
gotta be." Yeah, like, I'm constantly in that space, and I have to, like, remind myself, "Yeah, no, it's SEO is way more important than
yeah.
cute."
Well,
It's you
I
wanna be able to find and know what the show is about.
Yeah, I started a podcast that was one of my tests. Like this was never supposed to go on for years, and it's called the Podcast Rodeo Show. And it's where and now if you have to explain your show, you've picked a bad name. And I would say, "Oh, it's where we grab a random podcast and see how long we can hang on." And that's great, but everybody thinks it's about horses or
Yeah, you have
whatever.
a different
So,
audience than you expect. They're like,
yeah,
"Wait, hey, hold on, where are the
yeah.
horses?"
And so what I did was, because I was gonna just rebrand it, and my audience is like, "No, I love the name," because I have a picture of a blue yeti with a lasso on the artwork, and I said, "All right, hold on." And this is where, if you wanna get cute with the name, it's not the end of the world, just throw in a tagline. So it's
Mm,
like the podcast review show, colon, first time impressions and reviews or something like that. So that if somebody types in podcast reviews, hopefully, I will then show up. So that's the other thing I help with. And then they go, I've got a name, I've got this and that, and then it's like, okay, like I'm gonna hit record. What do you want me to say? And this is where you just kind of baby step it. And I'm like, okay, welcome to the show, whatever it is, where we, whatever it is you do, so that you can, however you want your audience to benefit. So, welcome to the School of Podcasting, where I help you plan, launch, and grow your audience so you can create engaging content and yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. And then it's just from there, I'm like, okay, what's the topic of the day? And you just baby step it through, and all of a sudden they go, okay, what's next? And I'm like, oh, that's it. Now just create more episodes. And they're like, no, really, seriously, what's it? And I'm like, let's see. We've made our episode. We've submitted to all the directories. Yeah, just promote your show at this point. And they're like,
Check.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a lot of what I do is just baby stepping people through it.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny. It's almost like feels more complicated than it actually is because there are so many options. So, yeah, it's interesting to hear how you approach kind of the start to finish of each of your episodes. I love that you start with a blog post. I've struggled a lot with that, like in all aspects, I guess, of my day-to-day job, because whether it's live streaming or video presentations or podcasting, I'm like a writer by trade. So I'm always like, I need to write it all out. But then I found that when I was doing that and putting it up, I was so distracted by like all of the, genius quote unquote things that I had put up and worried that I was going to miss something, that I was just like recording and re-recording or stumbling over my words, or like it was too distracting for me that I had to stop doing that, even though I think it was a better, like it would have been a better show if I could have gotten past it. But I end up having to just riff or have like a bulleted list, on the side that I review before. Because if I have any kind of notes up, I'm immediately like looking over here, double checking,
Yeah.
or looking
Well,
down, or like terrified that I'm going to miss something important and missing what could be really important in just having a conversation with someone.
yeah, that's one advantage of an audio podcast is I can glance at my blog
True.
post, look at the paragraph and kind of summarize and
Yep.
and don't have to worry about not looking at a camera. But the other thing for me at least, like I said, is it helps me focus on that. And when I write, I throw grammar out the window. I write like I talk.
That's
And
awesome.
because we don't talk like we write and we don't write like we talk. So I
Mhm.
just I just write like I talk. And that way if I am reading it, it doesn't sound like I'm reading it because it's kind of just written in a very casual, sitting across the table from me manner. And that way, like I say, I'll look up at a paragraph and I'll be like, oh, that's the one where I'm talking about such and such and go from there. And the other thing I like about it for me is I've already kind of put down the basement of the house, shall we say, and I've
Mhm.
got the main points. And now as I'm going back through it, that's when my creativity comes into play. And now I
Yep.
can start to make it funny or I'll come up with a joke or whatever and go that route. So everybody has their own style. Some
Yeah.
people, want to riff, some people want to write, some people, do whatever you want, but play with it. That's what I always tell people. Like, well, should I write it out? I might do one and see what you think. Was it easier or harder than just riffing? And then pick the one you like.
Yeah. Yeah, test and play. When I was first getting into a lot of this, I was the person who like, couldn't, it was weird. It felt really, really weird talking into a camera by myself. Like I was much more comfortable if I could have a guest on, but if I couldn't have a guest on, I would always just have a plant in the live audience, like a coworker or a friend or, or my partner, like anyone that could just be there to like type in comments as I was talking, because just seeing them coming up, being like, asking questions, reminding me of clarifying points, just made me feel okay. And then I could continue on with the content. So yeah, there's always ways around it and things you can test and play with to just give you, help you push through difficult parts or help you build your confidence as you're moving forward or get you comfortable if you don't have a full audience listening or watching you when you first start
Well,
off, because no one does. So,
yeah, that's similar to an old radio trick. When I was growing up, I'd listen to the radio and you'd have, Rock and Rick on 96 FM. And I'd hear somebody call in and like, hey, Rock and Rick, can you play this song? And he'd be like, on 96, and here it comes. And so immediately I thought, well, wait, that's cool. I can call up Rock and Rick and he'll play my song. So I called up Rock and Rick. I'm like, hey, Rock and Rick, can you play some Judas Priest? And he's like, no, that's not that state. He goes, but I'll play some Loverboy. And I was like, oh, okay. So I had to go, hey, Rock and Rick, can you play some Loverboy? And he's like, on 96, here it is. And so that's when I learned, oh, he's not really playing what
he's
people
not
want to
looking for,
hear.
yeah. looking for
Yeah.
recommendations. Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
did get me to call in. So if you're
Cool.
doing a Q&A kind of show, or
Mhm.
you just want people to like use that voicemail that you set up, have cousin Earl call in. Like, here's a good question, Earl. Can you call this number and ask it? And then you play that in your show. And then everybody goes, oh, wait, if I actually call that number or speak
Yeah.
pipe or whatever you're using, if I actually do that, she'll actually answer the question on the show. I'm gonna
Mhm.
try that. So you can kinda prime the pump with the old radio trick, so
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I don't do this in any of my shows, but I love the voicemail. Like a lot of the shows I listen to do that. It's kind of like an end up wrapping part of their show. And I always find it fun to listen to people calling in. So yeah, it's a good point. I never thought that you could absolutely just seed some of those people to get that started. That's smart.
yep.
We have a great question coming in from Dan. Dan's asking, for someone looking to scale a podcast, how important is the work between the episodes? Creating micro
Oh,
content, commercials, editing, upskilling, all of that.
yeah, it's the Daveism here is so many people think. I always say, if you think having a big wedding is a success to a successful marriage, it's the same thing with a podcast. Like, so many people think, if I just
Yeah.
launch it and I'll have a big launch and I'll tell everyone.
Mhm.
Really, or if you write a book, that was the thing that got me with the book. I was like, "Okay, no
Mhm.
more editing. Whew, we're done." And that's really where the work starts. And the same thing with any kind of podcast. Making the content is kind of the easy part. Getting people to watch and listen is the part that
Mhm.
gets tough. And so that's where I know some people will, again, here's another strategy. They'll batch record, a month's worth of stuff and then spend the rest of the month just promoting it on
Mhm.
social and answering questions in Facebook and on Reddit and Mastodon and all the 87 other social medias that are now trying to replace Twitter.
Yep.
So it's, yeah, in between is really where the work starts, because just the whole, hey, I've listed myself in all 17 podcast apps. If for those of us, again, gray hair, that remember the phone book, they still make them, but they're much thinner now. But being in the phone book didn't make you famous. It just made it easier to be found. And
Mhm.
so being in Apple and Spotify and Google and Amazon and iHeart and etc., it makes it easier to be found, but it's not going to make you famous. So that's where you got to make it easy to share. I had a guy, Jack from the Darknet Diaries, and he was at the time getting like 300,000 downloads an episode. And I was like, "All right, Jack, share the secret.
Yeah, how are you doing it? Yeah.
How you doing that?" And he said, "Well, so many people think, man, I wish I had a team like all the people on NPR and these big networks." He goes, "You do have a team. It's called your audience." And so what he did was, before he even launched, he had like a little focus group, people that would tell him the truth. Because your mom is going to say it's great, right? Mom will
Your
say
mom
things like,
loves it. Yeah.
yeah, "Oh, look at you. You're so professional. Look at the microphone." And notice mom's not talking about the content. She's talking about the equipment.
Yeah.
And so, but he had people listen and said, "Hey, did you listen to the whole thing? If not, where did you stop and why?" And then on a
Mhm.
scale from 1 to 10, where 10 is I'm going to tell everyone, how likely are you to share this with a friend? And
Mm.
if he got a 7, he kind of wasn't happy, because 7 is a C and C is average. And he's a guy that gets he you don't want people to like your show. You want people to love your show. And so when he got a 9 or a 10, he was happy. 8, he'd kind of live with. And so his big secret was knowing that his audience likes this content. The typical podcaster, when we go to pitch ourselves, we get all squirrely and icky, and we feel salesy, and we'll say something like, "Hey, like, maybe kind of. I mean, you don't have to. Like, our show is, our website .com. Okay, thanks." And you're like, "Wait, what was that?" Jack was like, "Hey, I noticed we're at the 28-minute mark, and obviously you like the content because you're still here. Could you do me a favor? And actually, this is a win-win. If you could share this with that one person who needs to hear what we talked about today, they're
Yep.
going to thank you so much for that. And I'm going to get to grow my audience. Or you could just tell them to go to darknetdiaries.com." And I was like, "Okay, great. And what's the other thing you're doing?" He goes, "Oh, no, that's it." And I thought about it. 70% of podcasts, according to Jacobs Media, are discovered via word of mouth.
Word
So
of
he's
mouth.
so
Yes.
he's just throwing, gas and lighting it on fire of word of mouth. It's like, let's do that a little more specifically. And I get why people don't wanna do that and why we feel salesy. is because we feel like the salesman that's trying to, if it's a car salesman, they're going to sell you a bucket of bolts. And I asked somebody once, I said, so your podcast is a bucket of bolts then? And they're like, well, no, I spent probably 9 hours on this thing. And I'm like, okay, so you're trying to help people. And they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. And I go, so why are you stopping yourself from helping people? Isn't that why you started this? And all of a sudden you start to see the mental change, because it's not a bucket of bolts. And if it's good, people should want to share it. And if they're not sharing it, why is that? Maybe we need to go
Yeah.
back and look at that.
Super smart. Yeah, it's true. We tell ourselves these stories that we're like, "Oh, I don't wanna bug anyone," or we don't wanna be kind of in their faces about it, but yeah, I then we are missing then the whole point behind it, which was to help those people, so absolutely.
And one of the things I've started to focus on here more than usual, and especially in YouTube, right? The analytics in YouTube are to die for. There, I
They're
mean, you can learn
incredible, yeah.
everything. And so you can really see how far people are listening. And you
Mhm.
can do that in audio in Apple and Spotify. Apple especially, you can really see exactly if you do an ad in the middle of your show, you get this big dip right in the middle where everybody's hitting fast forward,
Yep.
and so downloads are great and they're fun. They're more important, I guess, if eventually you want to have advertising. But if you're not doing it for advertising and you're promoting your own stuff, then look at that completion rate, because that's
Mhm.
really more important than the download.
Yeah. Yeah, huge. Yeah, understanding what your goals are and how to track those against the analytics and all of these different tools is hugely important. I feel like and I'm guilty of this, a lot of the time too. We get kind of these like metrics in the back of your head that everyone else is talking about and you're like, "Oh, okay, I got to I have to have this amount of downloads and I'm trying to get to this point." It's like, "Are you though?" Like what are the goals that are actually important to why you did this podcast in the first place? Like what is it trying to accomplish and why? And yeah, I'd be willing to bet that for the mass majority of us, downloads is probably not the goal. So,
Yeah. Well, I always
don't
say,
worry so much about it.
yeah, for me, like in January, everybody says I'm going to drop 40 pounds and I'm going to start a podcast. So my download numbers in January
So
go
true.
through the roof.
Yeah.
And then in February, much like all the gym memberships, my numbers go down,
Yeah.
but my membership signups go up from some of those people that started in January. So if I
Yeah.
went solely by downloads, I'd be really depressed because my numbers just nosedive in February, but my membership is going up. So
Yeah.
I that's what I base my success on, is not downloads, but membership signups. And so in February, while my numbers are tanking, I'm actually thrilled as a pig in mud because the membership's going up. So that's where you really have to know your why. You have to know your who specifically. Like if I say, "Oh, I'm going to do a show for uh, maybe widows," right? Well, that sounds like I've really niched down. I cut out all the men, but there's a big difference between that widow who's 38 and lost her husband in a car crash versus
Mhm.
Mildred, who just lost Harold at age 96 to natural causes. Because if you do that episode about, "Hey, ladies, it's time to get back out there," I know Mildred had a wild streak at one point, but
Mildred's like, "Nah, thanks.
yeah, no,
Not gonna
I'm good.
happen."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so knowing your why and your who helps you determine your what, and when you know what to talk about that's gonna hold their attention while still getting you what you're doing, that's why, starting a podcast, it's easy to burp into your phone, but to figure out, okay, what can I talk about that's gonna lead people to my why while entertaining them enough to keep them engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question coming in from Alberto. Hey, Alberto from Arizona. He asks, can you mention two similarities between creating for radio and creating for podcast? Thanks.
Yeah. One of the things similarities is storytelling. I was just listening today. I live near Cleveland, Ohio, so it's really depressing when it comes to sports. But they were talking about Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is this 39-year-old quarterback. He moved from his one team to a new one, and everybody's
Mhm.
like, "Ooh, this is the story of the season to see if he's going to be able to still do it." And then he basically broke his ankle or tore his Achilles or something. But he's probably done for the season. And the
Yeah.
one sports guy said, "Man, that was the story." And I thought about it. If you look at even NASCAR, it's always the fighting behind the scenes. It's not the guys turning left for 3 hours, it's the story.
Yeah.
And so it's always about anytime you can share a story. I always say, when you publish on a regular schedule, whatever that schedule is, you're seen as reliable. And if you give good content, well, then they're going to like you. But more importantly, anytime you can make a point with a personal story, then they get to know you. And now
Then they
you've
get
got
to know
the whole,
you. Yeah.
yeah, that's the whole know, like, and trust. So when, Muhammad Ali died, I was a huge fan of his because there was so much more to that guy than boxing. And
Yeah.
but my audience wanted to hear about podcasting. So I said, okay, here's some things you can learn from Muhammad Ali. He just died this week. Number one, completely unique. Number two, really, really talented. Number three, always promoting, et cetera, et cetera. Did the same thing when Robin Williams died. And
Hmm.
so I was sharing parts of me while still talking about
Through the
podcasting.
lens of
Yeah.
podcasting. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So that's a similarity. The one thing you don't do in podcasting is I loved when Andrew Dice Clay started a podcast. He's a comedian from late 80s, early 90s.
Mhm.
Really big guy. And in the middle of his show, he does a reset, which is what you do in radio because every 10 minutes your audience change. And he's like, "You're listening to the Dice Man." And I'm like, "Did you think I started in the middle? Like,
You're like, I know, I'm still
yeah,
here.
I'm still here." Yes.
Yeah.
Uh, but I guess maybe somebody did say from radio, like, "Yeah, but what if you don't listen in one sitting? Maybe you stopped halfway through and went into the
That's
store."
true. Yeah.
And I was like, you made me think. You're my friend for life. So, but yeah, so it is different. If you listen to, especially radio that's talk radio, you will hear they have about 30 minutes of content and they just repeat it over and over and over. And I
That's a
don't know
really
that
good point. Yeah.
yeah, I know, Jim Rome's another sports guy, and he'll be like, "Hey, welcome back to hour number 2. We're talking about this," and then he kinda does the same hour, maybe with a little different slant, and that's when he starts taking phone calls because he's kind of out of material, and so I don't know that that would work in podcasting where it's like, "Hey, all right, here we are, the 2nd hour of the show." First of all, 2-hour podcast. Yeesh, that's, the old question is how long should my podcast be? As long as it needs to be and not a minute more. And there's a radio guru, Valerie Geller, has a great line. She says, "There is no such thing as too long, only too boring." And so
It's
I
so
don't know that
true.
I
That's a
don't know.
great line.
Well, I mean, I've heard 2-hour podcasts that felt like 2 minutes because they were
Yeah.
just super engaging. And I've heard 2-minute
Yeah.
podcasts that felt like 2 hours
Yep.
because you're just, ugh. So
Eh,
yeah. So the question is how long can you hold people's attention is really the
yeah.
question there.
And I feel like we're in this space and time where people are binging things, right? It's like kind of the whole, Netflix
Yeah.
mentality where, now it's just like, okay, next episode. Okay, next episode. So, if you have a longer podcast, great. Like you could still build a really great audience. I mean, we talk a lot about or have mentioned a lot on this show, Dak Shepard's podcast, which was, by and
Yeah. Yeah.
large an hour and a half, 2 hours, and no one cares because they're interesting conversations that he's having with, with famous people and all of his friends. And you dive deep into those stories. And if you have to jump, out of the car or step away from cleaning or whatever you're doing while you're podcasting, you'll jump back into it and continue on. And you're right, it is different than radio where you're turning it off and then it's continuing on without you. There is the ability to kind of stop, and at the same way there's the ability to lose hours of your day just going next, 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 and moving into the next episode.
Well, and one of Dak's superpowers, and if you are comfortable doing this, it helps, but he can be super vulnerable. Like he will throw
Yep.
himself way under the bus.
Oh yeah.
And when you do that to an audience, it creates like this connection. Like, I can't believe this person's saying this to me. They must really trust me. So you
Yeah.
kind of get that. And you brought up binging. The other thing that drives me nuts is people keep quoting that stupid article about we have the attention span of goldfish,
Oh
which
yeah. Yeah.
if you dive into that, that was like a footnote of a report of somebody mentioned in a report. It's like so not true. And I always
Yeah.
say, if we have the attention span of a goldfish, like why does the word binge exist?
Yeah.
It's like, so I don't think we've lost our attention span. I think it's the direct opposite. I think we are much better at spotting horrible content. So when I hit play and I hear, "Hey, thanks so much for tuning into the podcast. It's Tuesday and I promised you a podcast every Tuesday, but I'm not sure what we're going to talk about." I will hit stop right there. That person's going to waste 20 minutes of my life.
Yeah.
So I think we're better at spotting okay, these people don't know what they did their artwork in crayon and they don't know what they're going to talk about. I'm like, I'm pretty sure this podcast is going to waste my time.
Yeah, and there's so many out there that we're not gonna put up with one that's gonna waste our time anymore.
That's it. Friends don't let friends listen to bad podcasts. So
Oh my goodness. Well, speaking of time, we are at the end of our hour, which like for me at least went by like this.
it
I
flew
will
by.
have to have we will have to have you back on. You were just a wealth of knowledge. I'm gonna have to go back and look and even just like write down all the quotes that you said. They're absolutely fantastic. If you are whether you are here in the live chat with us or you are listening or watching later, I hope that you feel encouraged. Podcasting has grown so much over the last little bit, but it's still this space where you can really, find yourself and find your voice and test and try things. Like it really is a very cool medium that offers us all just a ton of flexibility. So I hope that you find that confidence and practice and get great at it, and yeah, keep hanging out with us, and maybe we'll be able to trick Dave into coming back again. Now that
You,
he's Ecamm fam,
yeah,
maybe.
you don't have to twist my arm too hard to come back and talk podcasting. I'm always happy to.
Oh my goodness. And even if we can't get Dave to come back, which I think we can, you should absolutely go on over to School of Podcasting and learn more and listen to your shows. Dave, where else can people find you? How can they soak up all of your content?
Yeah, schoolofpodcasting.com is my main site, but if you stand next to me, I will start a new podcast. So I have one website that just has everything I do, and that's at powerofpodcasting.com.
Send all of your podcast ideas over to Dave and you can
That's it.
convince him to start a new show with you. I
Probably.
love it. Oh, I love it. All right. Well, if you love this podcast, we hope that you share it with someone. Word of mouth, as we said, is a big deal. You can find all of the places where this podcast exists at flow.ecamm.com. We're available on all of the different places, including now YouTube Music, which you can listen to on the go, everywhere, video and audio, you pick. And then this show and all of our episodes are brought to you by our friends at Captivate. Captivate is our podcast host, and they make it possible for us to get this show out to all those podcast players. They also have just the most ridiculous feature set. You can plan episodes, you can, put in your ads, you can get all of those amazing analytics and everything in between. They're fantastic. If you're looking for a good host, captivate.fm is the choice for you. And we do all of our repurposing and transcripts and a lot of video editing and cutting up into smaller video clips. All those in between episodes are brought to you by our friends at Descript. We live and breathe in that tool, and Ecamm has an integration. So we literally just hit edit in Descript at the end of live streaming or recording a video, and it just shoots that video right through into the Descript. And then we can do all of that quick and easy editing and post-production stuff and then get it out to everyone. So definitely give them a try. You can find them over at descript.com. If you're an Ecamm customer, we have amazing bonuses and discounts and all of that for you on our website. You can go to that and find the perks at ecamm.com/blog/perks. And you can get discounts on both of these things because that's how much we love you. And we will see you again next week. Doc is still out. He's in the birthday mode. So next week, I will be back here with Eric Fisher, and we're going to be talking all about productivity. So you'll have to grab a pencil, a notebook, or an app, or whatever you want. But we're gonna get more productive with Eric. And then Doc will be back the following week. So yeah, we appreciate it. Thanks so much for hanging out today, Dave. I appreciate your time.
Oh, this was a blast. And tune in next week. Eric is a great guest. I can tell you that up front.
Yeah, I'm selfishly only bringing on guests who I just want to learn from, and you're all along for the ride. So, so this is why I podcast, to learn and grow and get to hang out with cool people. And if it's helping other people, then win.
Excellent.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone, and we will see you next time. Thanks, Flow Riders.